Okay, we are now live for the YouTube audience. This is the Vermont House Commerce and Economic Development Committee. We will be meeting the first couple of hours discussing tax increment financing and looking at some language to help municipalities because of the COVID issues, and we'll get more information on that shortly. So with us this morning is Becky Wasserman, our legislative counsel. She will walk us through the draft that she has prepared for us, and we'll hear from others. So good morning, Becky.
Morning. Will you be bringing up the language?
Yeah, I'll have Amy. Can you make Becky a co-host so she can screen share?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Should be all set to go, Becky.
Okay, I think I have it up now. Is that up for everybody?
Yep.
Okay, great. So Becky Wasserman, Office of Legislative Counsel now with a SEL. So this language is extending by 1 year the debt incurrence period for certain TIF districts. So by statute, a TIF district has, most of them that were created under the current statutory regime has 5 years to incur their debt from the time they were created. And then if that happens, then they have an additional 5 years. So for a total of 10 years. So this language is extending by 1 year the debt incurrence period for the TIF districts listed. They are listed out individually. So I just want to explain this because the TIF legislation is spread out amongst a number of different bills. So when trying to draft this, I thought it would actually be helpful to put in one place rather than just saying extending it by 1 year, put in one place what those actual dates are, so it would be easier to reference. But the effect is essentially for each of these individual districts, they're only getting an additional year. The Burlington Waterfront TIF district has a sort of unique situation, so I'll get to that when I go through the language. So in subsection A, this is saying that notwithstanding any other provision of law, the period to incur indebtedness is extended for the following districts. So you'll see them listed here. Barry goes to March 31st, 2023. The second is Bennington, which is extended to March 31st, 2028. The Burlington Downtown TIF District is March 31st, 2022. And then number 4 is the Burlington Waterfront TIF District. So this TIF district, the bulk of the parcels in this district, the period to incur debt has already ended. A few years ago in 2016, the legislature acted to extend the period by an additional 1.5 years for 3 parcels in that waterfront district. And those are the parcels that sort of represent the City Place project. So those parcels are still sort of have an active debt incurrence period, and those are extended to June 30th, 2022. There is some language in the 2016 Act that that has some conditions about. I should have had that brought up too. That has some conditions about how that period can be extended for those districts. So this is saying that they still have to meet those original conditions that set forth in the 2016 Act that allows them to make this special exception for those 3 districts. those 3 parcels. Then Montpelier is extended to March 31st, 2029. South Burlington, March 31st, 2023. And then finally, St. Albans is March 31st, 2023. Subsection B is saying that although you're extending this debt incurrence period for these specific TIF districts, none of the districts listed in subsection A can extend the period that they can retain municipal or education tax increment. So that is a 20-year period. So we're not saying that they get 21 years. They still get their sort of original 20-year period. And then the effective date is on passage.
Any questions for Becky? Great. Thank you, Becky.
Would you like me to keep this screen up or stop the share?
I think we're okay for now.
To stop the share. Okay.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And so next, Commissioner Goldstein, would you
Sure. Good morning.
join us? Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, and thank you for giving us some time to talk in favor of this change. So just to a little bit of a recap, but the Vermont TIF districts have 10 years from the creation of their district in which they could incur debt. And due to the dramatic economic impact of COVID-19, many of these districts are now facing new and unforeseen obstacles in meeting that timeline for incurring debt as set in their district's plan. These obstacles include bringing bond votes before voters in the next year during these uncertain times, and stalled plans with private developers and delays in the construction year that happened this year. Without additional time to address these concerns, projects that have been supported by the community and the state may not be able to happen. So rather than see these public improvements become abandoned that would provide jobs and critical revitalization, we want to look at how to provide the necessary time to adjust. Public investment in our downtown and regional hubs provide jobs, stimulate private investments. These are all an important piece of Vermont's recovery from the pandemic. Now more than ever, we need communities to have every tool in the toolbox available to them. The state can support. This happens by giving Vermont TIF districts additional time to incur the debt and move the projects forward in a responsible manner. If the plans that were approved change, districts would need to report those in their annual report, and any substantial change will come before the council to verify that the financial viability still remains. So we wholeheartedly want this extension to occur.
Thank you, Joan. Christy, did you have a question?
I did, Mr. Chair. Thank you. But Joan just answered that. My question was going to be to Rebecca, and I'm sorry I was late getting my hand raised. But I was just questioning whether this was because of the COVID pandemic, and Joan answered that. So I'm all set.
Okay. Any other questions for Joan? Charlie?
Good morning, Joan. Thinking that we'll probably have some other folks testify as to the direct impact of COVID on why they couldn't move forward. I can understand the bond vote in terms of getting people to the polls, but it would be great to learn other reasons why. If you know, or if are the other speakers, I see Dominic here, and also and so are they planning on speaking to that, or I'm just interested to know that.
I could speak to that. I'm sure they could also speak to it, but basically it's not just about people coming to the polls. It's about voting in favor of debt incurrence when there's so much uncertainty. The crisis is still unfolding. It's not over. What about town budgets? How is that going to sugar out? What about property tax increases? So there's a number of extenuating confluence of events that would make this problematic to bring it forward before we have a true sense of recovery being on the way.
So that just even that doubt and uncertainty is what could possibly make it so those bond votes would not pass in theory as well.
May not pass. Developers may not go through with their projects. Depending what the project is. Hotels.
Yeah.
That's a tough go. Generally, business people don't like uncertainty. That's just it's a deterrent. And now more specifically, we have a health crisis on top of it. So with no end in sight, despite optimistic projections, I just think the uncertainty is a reason to give some extension here so that these projects can come to fruition. We will need everything to recover from this. And so TIF is the one tool really that we have to spur development.
I'm just thinking that the one downturn or downside we have in extending TIF, the time in which you can incur debt is you have a shorter time in which to actually repay that using the tax increment, right? So that it potentially could increase payments. The longer you extend that period in which you can incur debt, it has an impact on the repayment requirement. So it may actually be higher once that repayment ends, the recapture ends of the increment. So it could actually end up with higher property taxes paid by the local property owners. I think, am I thinking that right?
I think you are with a shorter term, but I think it's hard to generalize because it's going to depend on the increment that's expected in that particular financial plan. Also, it's an extension. It's not a must. They don't have to delay it, but let's give them that flexibility to delay it. It really is a very local decision.
Okay, thanks. I just want to understand. I mean, what is the impact of actually extending it versus not extending it? So, thank you.
Zach, did you have a question?
Charlie asked it. I guess generally, I've been reading a little bit about what's going on with the City Place thing in Burlington, and I'm wondering, what impacts that'll have on. I mean, that feels super complicated already, and there's a whole bunch of other issues involved with that. It sounds like. Are they going to be coming back to us, tasked for another extension? I don't know if you can talk generally about how this is going to impact the city place whole or whatever in Burlington.
They would also have an extension under this, which I think under the circumstances could only help, not hurt. And I have no way of knowing what will happen, but an extension of time could help the case.
Any other questions for Commissioner Goldstein? Great, thank you, Joan.
Thank you.
Winooski Mayor, Madam Mayor, Christine Lott, good morning. Thank you for taking time to speak with us this morning. And I know you're on a time crunch, so we'd be glad to hear what you have to tell the committee.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. So we are not on the list in this legislation. We are lucky to be nearing the end of our TIF district and have already taken out all the debt that we need to meet the vision of our district. I will say that we, to Joan's point, the TIF is really a really great tool for spurring economic development, which is something that we need right now, especially. In Winooski, we invested $30 million and generated more than triple that in private investment. We are on our last project that's going to complete our TIF district, and there has been impact by COVID. There has been delay in moving forward. We currently are planning a hotel. I think in the hotel industry, there's some hesitation now about building new. So we could be, this project could change. We're fortunate that the bond was already passed. We already have access to that debt. But I could see in a position where for these communities that aren't as close, it's taken us nearly the full 20 years to implement all of the projects that would fulfill our TIF district. So 1 year can really make a big difference. And Winooski wanted to come and support this on behalf of all the communities that are in a position where their TIF district may be impacted.
Okay, and I think you're here representing all the mayors in the state of Vermont.
Yes, thank you. Yes, the Mayor's Coalition is very much behind this. We all feel like this is strongly needed for our communities and others in the state.
Okay. Any questions for Mayor Lott? Very good. Thank you very much for speaking with us this morning. We appreciate it. And let's see. Abby, good morning.
Good morning, Representative. My name is Abby Sherman. I'm the Grants Program Manager for VEPC, and I'm just here to offer my support for this bill as well, answer any technical questions you may have regarding TIF.
Okay. Is there any questions for Abby? This is going a lot faster than I thought it was going to. Okay, Abby, thank you.
Thank
Karen.
you.
Morning, Karen. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having me. I had to unmute myself. We're strongly in support of this piece of legislation. The tax increment financing districts are those areas of our larger downtowns that really drive our economies. We contribute a huge amount to local option taxes, sales taxes, rooms and meals taxes that benefit the state across the board. And to Representative Kimball's questions, it would be virtually impossible and almost, I think, irresponsible for a municipality to try and put forward a bond vote right now with the level of uncertainty that we have in the economy and the way that Vermonters are really hurting at this time. So extending the ability to incur debt by 1 year will be very helpful. I want to make sure that the committee understands that the last section of this bill makes it clear that you can't actually retain the education fund tax increment for any longer. It's just the ability to incur debt that's being extended by 1 year. And I think that's an important distinction, not only for your committee, Representative Markup, but also for some of the other committees that are in the House. So thank you very much for your support. And we hope we can get this bill out fairly quickly.
Okay, thanks. I need to have a conversation with Chair Ansel to see if Ways and Means wants to take a look at it. Also, generally, we share duties on TIFs. So I'll be in touch with her to see if she does. I need to find out just how we are going to put this forward and what bill it will go. It may go in the budget with our pieces of CRF monies, or it could go as a standalone. And Janet might have something, I don't know, but so long as the committee's good. Go ahead.
Yeah, we appreciate you having that conversation.
Okay, thank you. Dominic, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Morning. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm glad I tuned in. I'll connect with Rebecca and also Abby. We thought we were already at November or the fall of 2023. So we'll make sure. So moving that to March actually moves us in the wrong direction. So we'll make sure we're all thinking about that the same way and circle back to you. You know, as we look at it, we've been saying, all right, fall of 2023, that's generally 4 opportunities to go to the voters if nothing changes. And that's not a lot of time. We've got 4 opportunities, 4 projects, and none of us have any political capital right now to sell a bond vote. the TIF program, as I think about it, is fundamentally about risk. The community takes on more risk and makes more investment in order to get the private sector to make the types of investments that we envision that generally aren't market viable without this support. And we're not in a position to do that when we are weakened as we are due to COVID. And so, to Representative Kimball's question, just drilling down on that a little bit more, if you were to come out with a bond vote, even in March right now of 2021, voters are going to be saying things like, well, how can you have any certainty that in your financial model, if your existing increment sources could very likely be coming in for abatement or going up for tax sale, or there's just absolutely no certainty in your local grand list and a statewide grand list at this time. So there's no ability to sell it. You have no political capital. And the result is you've got stranded projects and lost opportunity. And those stranded projects already have tremendous amounts of public money in them, in acquiring the land, designing the projects, getting other grants. The whole premise of TIF is but for. Everything else is in. If your but for vanishes, everything else is left stranded. So in a nutshell, we're delighted that you're looking at this. And it's important, I think, to give us the extension just to follow through on what we've already committed.
Okay, Charlie?
I want to thank you for that. And St. Albans will always have a special place in my heart. Wondering if you had a project that you were looking at rolling out this coming March that you've said, no way. And could you tell us what that project or what that bond vote would have been had the winds been more favorable?
Yeah, there's, I'm not quite at no way yet, just that said, some of the projects that are illustrative of the concept is, the Fonda redevelopment, 5-acre brownfield. We're in for $1 million already. We need another $1.2 million to finish the other sites. Our ability to sell that to the voters depends on what happens on site 1. The intended tenant for site 1 has said, nope, we're not taking the property because of the uncertainty. I need another couple million for site 2 and 3. Can't go forward. Similar thing on a street project, downtown core block. All 3 of the sides have been streetscaped. Other sides of the square, if you picture it, we've now got one more side of the square on the block. Everybody that has businesses on that street is saying, hey, what about us? We need $1 million in TIF. There's $750,000 in other public funding. At some point we have to go forward, but our ability to service that $1 million in TIF depends on the rest of the tax base. So.
Thanks. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear as to the actual application. Thank you.
Yeah.
Stephanie?
I have just a quick general question. So what are the negative implications if we extend this a year? Is there any reasons why we shouldn't do this?
I couldn't quite hear you, Representative, but what was it? What's the downside? Is that what you're saying?
The downside so the I have a couple questions. What's the downside of extending this 1 year, and just recalling the list of TIF districts, how many would be coming up would be ending in the next year or two? Other than, I think Winooski is ending soon, but how many have very short timelines to the end?
I might direct the second part to Abby or Joan.
Abby, you have a list of those, right?
Yes.
The downside and the risk here, for the education fund, I have a hard time seeing it. It depends on where you sit, right? So from my perspective as an economic development guy, the exposure to the ed fund is fixed. You got 20 years of increment. You're not increasing the retention period. The state auditor would say that you want to have funds left over at the end of the TIF to go back to the ed fund, I suspect, but he can articulate his position. Really what we're talking about here is if you don't extend it, then fewer projects get done. And maybe a surplus builds up in the TIF fund at the end of it that was intended to be for a project, doesn't get spent on a project, and then we sweep the account and prorate it between the municipality and the ed fund. And so maybe some builds up there. But I see that as lost opportunity, not strengthening the education fund.
So there's very, very little negative implication to extending this 1 year.
Yeah, I can't see any implications in the primary or secondary analysis, only in the tertiary analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Zach?
And just to follow up, 5 of the 7 districts in that list, their period to incur debt will expire in the next 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
And I actually have a chart that Vepsi had sent me, and I can share it on the screen if that is helpful, that shows the periods for each of the TIF districts.
Sure, that'd be great.
I had 2 questions. One was what if things don't clear up in a year in regards to COVID, and you know, and we need to extend this again? You know, at what point does it become unfeasible to continue to extend the period to incur debt, but not the education retention, tax retention period? At what point does that become unfeasible or unrealistic and potentially harmful? And then my other question was, in regards to these districts, it sounds like in terms of that some of the districts are going for had potentially planned to have bond votes, and now you don't have to do that and you can extend it. But it sounds like there are also some districts that weren't necessarily going to do that. So do we have an idea of how many of these TIF districts were planning on having bond votes, and that no longer need to because of this? Well, will no longer need to if we pass this legislation? I think this is probably a question for Joan, maybe Abby. Both of them.
I'm a little confused by your question. They will all have to have a bond vote before they can incur additional debt.
So which of the TIF districts were actually needing to incur additional debt through a bond vote? Because it's not all of them, right?
You're saying how many were scheduled? Is that what
Yes,
you're asking?
That's my question. Yeah.
Do we know how many were scheduled and got called off? I don't know if I know the answer to that.
I don't know that answer
Right.
either.
Right.
So it's basically finding out who is this actually benefiting, which districts is this really benefiting. But then so that would be helpful to know. The other question was about what if things don't clear up in a year, and at what point does this become unfeasible, unrealistic, and potentially harmful?
So I suppose all the districts that are listed in the legislation will benefit from it, especially if their date of expiry is in the next 2 years for debt incurrence. As to your other question about feasibility, it's a difficult
But Joan,
one.
if they've already incurred all their debt, then it wouldn't necessarily impact them, right?
Right. Our expectation is that they have not. I'd have to look back at each and every financial plan, but to answer your other question about is it feasible without extending the period on education district, again, it is a very individual, we would have to look at each individual town to ascertain that. I don't know if Karen has any information about what other towns have told her or.
Well, the one thing I can say is that the all of these towns that are listed here had asked us for an extension to work on their behalf to try and get an extension for 1 year. I think there's obviously no predicting what's going to happen if the pandemic lasts longer than the additional year. TIFs are only going to be one aspect of the economic disaster that accrues in that situation. I could find out for you who had, who was thinking about putting bond votes on the ballot at this time, but we had, so if you think about the timeline, we had town meeting in early March. 2 weeks later, the state shut down. So anything that was in the offing at that point in time was necessarily delayed. So if you were going to have a special town meeting to put a bond vote before the voters after town meeting, you would have pulled back on that for all the reasons that were described just a few minutes ago. I don't know, other than St. Albans City, who had something planned for the spring or early fall.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I think it would be helpful to, to know who is actually going to be requesting a bond vote. And the reason for it is maybe this is not, well, it sounds like St. Albans, or Christine's district wasn't included in this as well. I guess that brings up another question, is why some districts were included and some weren't?
So, well, actually, maybe Joan can answer this, but Winooski is past the years in which it is allowed to incur debt. It's already closed out of that. And I believe Milton is the same. So those are not there.
Yeah, if you look at the chart, you'll see that the first, I think 5, their debt. If you look in the debt period column, except for Burlington Waterfront, which is 2020, all of the debt periods have passed for those. So Burlington Waterfront has that unique situation with those 3 parcels that are have a different incurrence period. So the ones that were included in the bill are everything from Burlington downtown and below, because those have debt periods that have not passed yet.
Right. It's everyone who has debt periods that have not passed would be impacted by the legislation, the proposed legislation.
If I could just add as well, for example, Burlington downtown, their last real opportunity to go to the voters would be this November. Town meeting day in March is too late. They would need to incur all of their debt, and that means sign the bond documents by March 31st, 2021. And for the others, the districts typically go to the voters on town meeting day and election day. So for the others, they only have 3 opportunities left. And for all of them, this November is pretty much out.
Okay.
Jean?
I was just going to add that, that considering the situation in Burlington, if we actually had to go to the voters, there's no way in hell a bond would pass.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I think that's pretty likely in any community.
Yeah,
right
but
now.
particularly now because of what's going on
Sure.
with City Place.
Yep.
So I support this very strongly.
Okay, Abby, I think we're good now. You can take it off screen share. Okay, does anyone need any other questions?
Mr. Chair, I did send to the committee the TIF report from April 1st that VEPSI did a great job of putting together an annual report of all the different projects. So Abby Sherman should be commended for that. It's a great report. So if you have any questions about VEPSI, it's posted to our website now under Abby's name, I think. At least Amy's working on that.
Great.
Almost there.
Zach?
I just, I'm at a glance, I support this. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think this is one of those tools that are helpful for during a recessionary period. However, at the same time, I'm feeling that I don't fully understand the implications of this and think that that others may not either. And I do wonder if we should be just having some quick contrarian voice in here. I know Doug Hoffer typically stands out against TIF districts, and it might be worth just at least hearing from him about this, Mike. So we're at least aware of some of the implications. I do realize we're on a timeline though.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand what the downside is.
Precisely.
I don't know that there is a downside.
And if there is none, then, and Doug has nothing to say about it, then absolutely go right ahead. But if there is, if we can't see a downside and we're not hearing it, then, and it could, then how, and we're voting on it without even knowing or hearing what the downside is, then we're going into this blind.
I would say that Ways and Means is probably going to want to take a look at it as well before we do anything with it. As soon as I hear back from Janet, we'll can certainly send the draft over. And Becky, did you send the draft over to Doug?
I have not, but I can send it.
Yeah, if you could send the draft over to him, just tell him that I've asked you to send it over and to see if he has any comments.
Okay.
That would be good. Thank you. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Zach and in general, what the TIF districts, and Bennington is one of the beneficiaries of that, is helped cover the cost of infrastructure in what is now a $56 million project for downtown Bennington. But aside from that, the example, we had the mayor and town manager of Berry City come up and talk to us in 2017, I believe it was. And they absolutely transformed the downtown district in Berry City that had a 20% occupancy rate to the last that I heard, it was 90%. So that's the benefit. And I think that needs to be emphasized. And I think Joan would probably back me up on that.
Sure. If you want me to comment on that, I would just say there's more downside in not acting than in acting. Because in not acting, there are deals that won't get done or infrastructure that won't happen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay. So is there any other questions, comments from anyone? Okay, so we'll wait to see if we hear anything from Doug and also to see how Janet wants to proceed. And we'll go from there. And then I have to find out how if the committee is willing and supports this, then how we go forward. So thank you all for joining us this morning. We appreciate your time. David will be joining us shortly. So I think, and what we'll do is there's new draft. Joan, I don't know if you have time to stick around with us. So we start going over that draft. We'll get a head start on it.
Sure.
And then start answering some of the policy questions that are now there.
Okay.
So just everyone mute and go off video and take 10. And David will be with us shortly, and then we'll give you a little break before we continue on.
Okay.
Hey, David, everyone's going to be right back. David?
Yes. Hey, good morning.
Hey, everyone's just taking a short break. They'll be back in a moment.
Like 5 minutes, 1 minute, 10 minutes?
Probably between 1 and 5.
Okay. I'm going to send you this document and as soon as I get it to work.
And we're still live on YouTube, just so you know.
Good to know. Thank you.
Sure.
Gang's all here.
Okay.
Summer seems over.
No,
I know, I hate to say that, but
I know, it certainly feels that way today, but it just can't.
no,
Usually September is quite a lovely month, so I'm going to count on that.
hoping.
I was contemplating putting on my heat. I'm going, no way, it's August. I refuse.
Oh,
Oh,
Everyone just remember that we're still live streaming.
oh.
wait.
Relate to the temperature issue.
But it certainly did change really quick.
Hmm.
Look at the long range forecast.
Question, Lynn?
Yeah, please. Are we going to have a chance to discuss some of these bills, like in a markup or something like that, that's not going to be with witnesses and
What bills? What do you?
like this one we just went over about the TIFs? Or, I mean, is it all just going to be witnesses? We're not going to get a chance to have any interaction among ourselves?
Oh, I think so. I'm just wanting to find out if, number one, Janet wants it, but want to see if Doug has any comments or not. So we take those comments first, and then we can, we're definitely going to have a discussion and some kind of a vote to make sure that the committee either supports or doesn't support.
Okay. I mean, because I have some thoughts on the TIFs that may answer some of Zach's issues.
Yeah, okay. I'm hoping Joan is going to join us again. I think she said she was going to. Was everybody that's not sharing their video back, or? Okay. I know Charlie's back. Bob's back. David's here. So why don't we look at this new draft and we can make David, yeah, he's a co-host. So David, you can pull it up on the screen if you'd like. And I think you and Charlie worked with Ted and Joan and others to put this new language together. So if you want to walk us through it, that'd be great. Thank you, David. And yes, we see it.
So good morning, David Hall, Legislative Council. You have in front of you the draft 2.1 of just what I'm calling for now, a draft bill on additional CRF relief for businesses. Representative Kimball and I did meet yesterday afternoon with a contingent of ACCD folks. And after that discussion, I pulled this draft together. I don't think it much matters necessarily the format you choose to take. That it could be easier or harder to follow either way what's going on. But I hope that when I raise all these questions to you guys, I don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. And at its most basic, you know, Commerce is requesting more money to give more money to businesses. And at this point, that's basically in 3 buckets. It's effectively the program they're already doing with some different conditions. That's one. And then number 2 is more money to lodging and you know, restaurants and entertainment that are hit the hardest because their needs are not being met. And then it's this new proposal for the ski areas to make changes. So that's the grant piece. And then of course there's the $60 million in marketing money, which is separate. However you guys want to attack that as changes to what's already on the books, which is the multiple layers of S350 and H966, or if you want to do something new, it's really not as important as the substance of the policy decisions you need to make. So this draft, I've tried to really just streamline, simplify the approach. It's just to appropriate more CR money for those purposes. It's not tied directly to the S350 and 966 layers, and I hope it just allows you to calls into relief the policy points that you need to focus on. So you'll see section 1 here is titled COVID-19 Additional Economic Support for Businesses. Okay, so this is $73 million from the CRF to ACCD to provide grants pursuant to this section to businesses that have suffered economic harm due to the COVID-19 public health emergency and economic crisis. Those are the appropriations and the magic words for the CRF. So as far as eligible businesses, this is much more simplified. So the agency may award grants to businesses in the following categories. The first one, as I said, right now, I've just called modified emergency economic recovery grants to businesses to meet the following criteria. You don't have to call it that. You don't have to call it anything. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just trying to put a moniker on it for the moment. So this first category is for basically any kind of business. And as long as it's a Vermont business, it can be private, it can be for-profit, nonprofit, as long as it's domiciled or has its primary place of business in Vermont. Doesn't matter if it has employees, doesn't necessarily matter when it went into business. You know, all those kinds of details that were in S350, this is kind of all consolidated in just to one thing. As long as it's a private Vermont business, check the box. 1B, I don't know if you need this or not. I brought it forward from the other ones, but it's that the business is either open at the time of application or is closed due to the COVID-19 public health emergency and has a good faith plan to be open. You know, that is a criterion right now under S350 and H966 grants. Certainly the agency could just incorporate that, you know, in its guidelines for administration. Doesn't necessarily have to be in the statute, but that's one I did bring forward. And then
David, before you go on, if you could just scroll up a bit, the reason what you'll notice by omission is that there's no requirement that they have an employee in this bill. So that covers any sole proprietors or any kind of business formation that doesn't have any employees. Just wanted to point out what was not there that's significant.
And you know, it's not necessary, but if you want to signal that, I mean, you could certainly say, if you needed to, you know, you don't have to say anything, but if you wanted to flag that to the world that you're drawing that distinction, you certainly could. And of course, the other way to do that is to actually, as the last draft did, is to go into the underlying statutes and strike through those things, and that obviously would send the same signal. The real hiccup with trying to graft this onto the other one is just the timing issues and all the different little changes that would be necessary, and maybe the confusion that would be born about what's old and what's new, old businesses, new businesses, et cetera. So, but as Representative Kimball said, this does not include a requirement that you have employees or an employee. Under C here, this is obviously another step towards loosening up the program. Remember that S350 started with a 75% or greater reduction in revenue. And then in H966, that was changed to 50%. And as of August 1st, all of that money was commingled and subject to the 50% standard. So right now, they're at 50% for all of the funds they have on hand. What this would do is say the business has experienced a 30% or greater reduction in revenue in any 3-month period due to COVID from March to December as compared to March to December. So that's really 3 changes against what we started with. We've gone from 75 to 50 to 30. We've gone from 1 month to 3-month period, and we've extended the basically the comparison range from September 1st to December 1st. Everybody clear on that? So this next piece is the part you talked about yesterday about, you know, new businesses who would not be able to show the 3-month reduction in revenue. And originally this had said something like, you know, if the business was organized on or after, it was 9/1/19 to 3/1/20, right? The problem that I saw there, and I don't have the answer yet, and this is something we talked about yesterday, is that if you go from a 1 month to a 3-month range, then the business, who knows when it was started, you know, can it show 3 months of loss? What if it can show 2 months of loss or 1 month of loss? So, and then what does it matter the precise timing it was formed? If you pick, you know, March 1st, well, what about a business formed on February 15th? So what I've created here is an either or proposition, and it's not linked to when the business was formed. This would actually apply across the board because there's also the issue raised for seasonal businesses that might have, you know, very different ranges of loss or gain over any given season compared to the previous year. So right now, this is the way I set it up. You're going to have to figure this out, unfortunately, but you could either show this 30% reduction over the 3-month period from March to December 2020 versus 2019, or you could come in and show a 30% or greater reduction in the monthly revenue between any 2 consecutive months beginning in February, right? So if you were formed, whenever you were formed, business was good in February and then fell off in March, or business was doing okay in June and then fell off in July, that would be the alternative means of demonstrating a loss due to the coronavirus.
Jim has a question.
This is more for, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, to this question of 30% and how we could more broadly address other businesses, for instance, you know, painting companies, window washers, and other contracting companies, if we could apply that 30% on an annualized analysis. And I'm just throwing out there just for consideration. and your thoughts on it, David and committee members. Thank you.
Yeah, the original proposal was to try to annualize the loss, rather if in the event that there was a shorter window than a full year of data. I think, look, what you're trying to accomplish at the biggest picture here is to ensure first that a business has suffered a loss because of COVID-19. That's your threshold problem. After that, you're really drawing arbitrary lines in the sand. And remember that S350 started at 75%, mostly for two reasons. One, the administrative burden of how many businesses would apply. And two, the finite pool of money that was available to serve, so that you wanted to try to help the hardest hit businesses first. Again, your progression has been from 75 and to 50 and now to 30. And there's still money left. So the question becomes, is a percentage loss in revenue over a given period, is that the way you want to measure, who deserves or who gets money? And if it is, then what are the right numbers? What's the right percentage and what's the right period?
Okay. My point is that, we've got a pretty deep, significant amount of money that's left over. And if we don't use it, but by what, the 31st or the 1st of December, we don't get it.
It's actually at this point, December the 20th, by virtue of our own statutes. If it's not spent by then, it will revert back to the CRF and will be used for whatever purpose the appropriations and administration determine is the best way to get it out the door before the deadline of December 30th.
Okay, thank you, David.
Bob?
It strikes me that this second one here, this 30% beginning in January 1st, it is going to negate the first one. I think most people would qualify, I'm speculating here, but most people would qualify under this second one and not have to, wouldn't qualify, necessarily have to concern themselves with the first issue, which the thing that bothers me a little bit about that is the firm that, did at a loss of 30% in, let's say, April, but came back roaring in June and July, and so it had a little rough patch, but really is in reasonably good health. That's my concern. Maybe I'm missing something.
Well, I'm just wondering if, depending on which one you could prove, would there be a difference in the amount of grant dollars that you get? So if you show that you had a 30% or greater reduction in revenue for 3 months opposed to 1 month, wouldn't you get a bigger grant? I don't know.
Except that this does not talk about the calculation of the grant. That is to be developed by the agency. And so it's a really good point as to whether or not we want to specify that in this bill instead of leaving it to the agency. We decided to leave it to the agency before, because what do you use to calculate for item II there, CII, in calculating the benefit? Is it the monthly income that you use as a percentage, or how do you do it? So it's not clear. Whereas you would say agency is going to use the same formula, 10% of 2019 revenue. So it's not clear in item II as to what that formula would be. So we need to hammer that out more.
Yeah. Stephanie?
A couple comments. So why have two caveats here, or two different requirements, not just go with one? And the other thing is, I want to mention just respond to what Bob had to say, is that, so even if someone did rebound and do well afterwards, they still experience that 1 or 2 month loss. So that's a significant loss if you're looking over 12 months. You know, 2 month, 30% loss is still a loss. So I don't know whether we should be, going into whether someone's rebounded or not, because they did experience a loss during this early time that, they experienced a loss at some time during this pandemic because at no fault of their own.
So the problem that C2 is trying to solve is for the business that has suffered a loss due to COVID, but cannot demonstrate a year-over-year decline, either because it wasn't in business or who knows. And that's why there's the second standard. Again, it originally came in as being limited to businesses that were, came into operation from a date certain or during a certain time frame, and you could certainly put that back. But that's the issue, is what if you don't have 3 months of data from 2019, basically.
Bob?
My point is this, with having the 3 months in there, if you have all kinds of money, then fine. Then II is not going to be a problem. But to the extent that we have limited funds and that we're going to be oversubscribed, then I think I says, look, we're going to give it to those people who have been damaged the most over a 3 month period as opposed to a 1 month period. What concerns me about II is this: we're not targeting it on those. I'm not sure I know the wording, but yesterday we were targeting for businesses that started up. I think it was September 1st of last year. But I guess my preference at this stage is to kind of go back to what we had yesterday, and maybe we need to refine it. But those are my thoughts.
Charlie?
One of the considerations, what we talked about yesterday with ACCD, is trying to make the language, or considering making the language more permissive, so that if a business just experienced an economic loss between March 1st and December 1st, 2020 due to COVID, would they be eligible for a grant? So that would be able to incorporate new businesses as well as existing businesses, and they'd have to demonstrate that loss. The problem with that, of course, is just administering a program and trying to put those bumpers around, not bumpers, but try to put the criteria around it as to what kind of loss, what size of a loss, what the benefit is, that kind of stuff. But it would certainly make it cleaner putting stuff in like there. So we may have an opportunity to consider a different litmus test there. But as to whether they're new or old, if they experience a loss, they experience a loss. I mean, I think that's what we really want to help, is those businesses experience a loss.
Yeah. But I suppose that if we leave it up to the agency to determine what that loss cap should be, that then, I mean, it shouldn't be just any loss. I think it should be a significant loss to be determined by the agency, and they could set that loss at 30%. Or they could look at, that might be an easier way to go about it. I don't know. But go ahead.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I should have reminded everyone at the beginning that, and this underscores what Representative Kimball said. Remember that a large part of these programs were delegated to the agency, including the amount of the grant and the extent to which and whether the grants should be reduced because there was other financial assistance available to the business. So as Representative Kimball said, this is really and has always been sort of the filter of whether you get into the program, but it does not determine the amount of the award. And that is still dedicated, that's still vested in the discretion of the agency at this point.
So if we had someone, if we had a business apply that says I had a $500 reduction and I want a grant, but it would still be to the discretion of the agency to look at all the circumstances and whether or not to approve that grant or not.
Well, so if you came in with a $500 loss and that turned out to be a sufficient percentage loss to qualify you, that would make you eligible. And then whatever amount of the grant award you receive would be determined by the agency's formula, which is adopted pursuant to guidelines. The statute does not dictate what the actual amount of their grant would be.
Right. Well, if we had it at 30%, but if we put language in that Charlie just suggested that you had a loss due to COVID.
Yep. Yeah, again, so I think the two functions here are to prioritize, levels at which businesses have suffered harm, and also to serve as a gateway for the administrative burden. I don't know if the burden turned out to be as bad as was feared, but my sense from the news reports is that it was not. So I don't know where that stands now.
Right. Something to really think about. Charlie? Okay. I think everybody put your thinking caps onto this one. We'll have to have discussions with the agency, so you get their feelings. Stephanie?
So I just want to make a comment about the new businesses. So, for all of us who've started new businesses, we know that first year you don't make much of a profit, and you perhaps are operating a loss already, and it takes a long time to kind of get these businesses off the ground. I know that we all heard from constituents who had newer businesses this past year and were left out of this earlier bill. But I'm really wondering how many new businesses are really going to qualify to show they've had a 30% loss in profit. I think it's not going to be that many. Just especially if you really just started your new business in late 2019. So
I don't think it's not profit, but it's revenue.
Well, even revenue. I mean, it's a it's my experience in creating a new business. It's just, it takes a while to get a business off the ground when you're marketing it and getting some income, and might be getting a little income, and we're talking all businesses, but I'm just sort of a general viewpoint that it's I'm wondering if we're putting a lot of effort into this new business piece, in that we may not be able to help that many people. It will help some, but not a lot, just for the matter of what it takes to start a business and start getting revenue.
Zach?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, maybe this is a whole other wrench to throw into whether loss in revenues is even a good place to be, a door holder, a placeholder, or whatever. That maybe we should be focusing on specific sectors, and there are places that you know, that may not be able to show loss, but are essential and need funding as well. So I guess I want to throw it out there that we could potentially look at other ways of creating a barrier for people to enter this that doesn't have to do with loss of revenues. And I don't know what those might be. But I'm thinking about, you know, when Tom Cavett spoke to us in June, he was talking about the service sector and nonprofits, you know, and in the recent letter that he sent that I shared with Mike, and he sent it to Jean and I as well, but he talked about higher education as well. You know, so how do we get how do we open this to folks that need it? And maybe loss in revenues is not necessarily will make it so that they can't even apply to this. So there's another idea.
Okay, let's think about this and let's move on.
Okay, so that was the first category. The second category, supplemental grants to lodging, dining, and entertainment businesses that demonstrate ongoing need from additional losses that have not been adequately addressed by an emergency economic recovery grant awarded pursuant to H966 or S350. So that is only one sentence for for a lot of substantive issues to be raised, right? I mean, so this is sort of a new category of businesses that would come for coronavirus relief funds. I mean, this is businesses that already got an award under S350 or 966. They would be from, you know, just these industries, lodging, dining, entertainment. They would have to demonstrate some sort of ongoing need from additional loss. They'd have to show that what they've already received was not enough. There's no timeframes here. There's no real criteria for what kind of loss over what period. You know, honestly, this would just give the agency authorization to give certain businesses more money, and they would have to figure out who and how much and on what basis, because there's no other detail.
Jean?
Thank you. I just, the term adequately, I don't know what adequately addressed means. And we don't know. I mean, I think as a committee, we should have some conversation around what that, I'm not sure what this ends up looking like. In actual, when the agency actually executes this. I'm at a loss. It's a blank check, so I'm at a loss for this.
We did ask Commissioner Goldstein for a little more information on this, and she said that sentiment was echoed in the Senate Economic Development Committee as well, to see what this would look like. So just like even a one-page description. So she said that that had been requested as well. And I don't know, I can't remember, David, if she promised to create one, or she just acknowledged that we were in need of one. I think it was probably the latter, without a promise of delivery, but yeah.
Yeah, because also that opens up a whole host of things, including geographical distribution of, you know, who's getting this money and where it's going, and it's just too much of a blank check for me. I hope that they do come up with some sort of a definition of how would they come to determine what is adequate or not, and also what the size of the grants would be.
Well,
So those are my musings. Thanks.
Well, I think the interesting thing here is that it's only for businesses that have received a grant already. And I think it's for only the businesses that have received at least $50,000 grant. We now know that there's another 52 million that's going out with a maximum of 150,000 additional dollars. That, I mean, how many businesses are going to be left that need more than $200,000?
Right.
And we're talking, the ask from the agency is $50 million in here.
Yeah. I guess for clarity and for people reading this, I think every business who's received, it doesn't matter what size. I think that it just has to be clearer. So if I'm a business looking at this and I have received some money, depending what category, it doesn't matter what category I'm in, will I feel that my needs have been adequately addressed? Now, we understand the sector we're talking about, but I don't think, as we're writing this, I think we need to somehow identify it more clearly, so that every business doesn't come back to us and say, oh, well, we weren't adequate, our needs weren't adequately addressed, whether they get a $5,000 grant or a $50,000 grant.
Joan is joining us now. Does the wedding venue people, and not just the tents but the photographers, everything that goes along with that, are they included in this definition that we're using?
Yeah, I believe that the folks from the wedding industry who met with us yesterday did then reach out to the folks in the agency and wanted to make sure that they would be included in that definition somehow. And I'm not sure what the disposition of that inquiry was as to whether or not they fit. I mean, by extension, you could say that they are related, but they're not necessarily included in that.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. Joan's with us now, so she can talk to whether or not they're included in that definition or not.
So forgive me for not looking deeply on this language to see if they're included. We do want them included, and I think the way to include them would be language that says something to the effect of event related or event affiliated businesses. That's what we did for the supplemental award. And I don't know if do we have it in here? Yeah, so here it just says lodging, dining, entertainment businesses, and I think in our announcement on the supplemental award, we said any event or event affiliated entities are eligible, because it's not a NAICS code. It's going to be all different types of businesses, but as long as they're able to represent that, it's either music or photography or,
Yeah. Okay. I get, Joan, is the thought here, is it going to matter what any of these businesses that have received a grant already in this definition, does it matter what their initial grant or even the supplemental grant that they received? It's not tied to a fixed amount like $50,000. It's any of these businesses that have received a grant and they don't. And I'm thinking that, and I don't know what you guys were thinking, but that they're showing that there's an ongoing reduction in their revenues month after month, that they're not catching up, or that they're just barely keeping their head above water. Is that what you're
Correct.
looking at?
That is our thinking, is that there's still a representation of unmet need. That's who we want to make sure that this would cover.
Okay, so it wouldn't matter what, if somebody got 20,000, they could still apply for a supplemental and get more
Yeah,
money.
and I think mechanically, we're probably going to have to do something which takes all that into consideration so that we're not bumping up against duplication of benefit, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the supplemental grants that you're doing right now with the leftover, that 52 million that's left over, is
Yep.
that just for businesses that received a $50,000 grant, or is that also for all those other businesses?
No, it's only for the ones that received the 50,000. And the idea was that that cap of 50,000 prevented us from helping some of the businesses that were a bit larger. And
Yeah.
as you could see from the distribution, it was very skewed toward the smaller entities. So this was an acknowledgement of that. However, we also recognize that it doesn't take care of those who didn't reach the cap. But again, without having the additional funding, we thought, let's take care of everybody who has been left out in this next round.
Mhm. Would any of the entities that are getting the supplemental be available to them in this new grant?
Yes. Again, it's a recognition that, like 50,000 may not cut it, nor may 150,000. So again, we would have to do a little bit more analysis of the true unmet need for those entities, but it's a recognition of, let's do the calculation on unmet need.
Okay. Charlie?
Just wondering, I don't think we talked about this yesterday, about how many, do you have an idea of how many folks that have already received the supplemental grants that may fall into this category? How many businesses?
So I don't have all of that. I have it in different ways. So for example, we did a little bit of a poll on how many were just below 50% loss, right? So the people who didn't get served at all. And we know there's another 700 entities that would be eligible. There are folks who, if you look at our graph, you'll see there are many people who received the 50,000. There's another, I think there's like 750 that are waiting for the supplemental grant. And of those, how many did we meet their need? I don't know. I'd have to look at the individual applications to be able to tell you. I don't have those groupings right now. It's just, again, a recognition that, some of the critique has been, well, 10% of revenue doesn't cut it. We've had losses of much, much more. And it had to do with their carrying charges, their fixed costs. And so we're hoping that having this additional pot will give us that ability to do that analysis further, instead of having kind of a one size fits all.
Okay, and then just the other question, were you thinking about a cap?
Yeah, we are, because we might have to, right? It's not unlimited funds. And I can't say that I have that ready. Like we're still kind of discussing that, so.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Christie?
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative O'Sullivan got me thinking about that adequately supplied and the perception. It may be a good definition for the commissioner and her department, but as far as perception out there, could we change that just as a suggestion to something like businesses that were restricted by the limitations and caps of, in a nutshell, the previous awards? This still gives the flexibility. And I like the idea of what the commissioner just said about there would have to be a new cap established, but not knowing what that is yet.
Mm.
Would that be a better understanding of what the intent is? We're restricted by limitations and caps of the previous grants.
I don't know which section this is, but I think one way that we described the supplemental being available to hospitality and event affiliated industry were people who have capacity constraints as imposed by the executive order. So this way to kind of, it took care of a lot of different venues, right? You know what I'm saying? Like we didn't really make this based on size necessarily, although we knew by raising the cap, we would help with the distribution into a little bit of the larger entities. But in terms of really trying to figure out, you know, am I eligible or not? You know, this is an acknowledgement that there's still capacity constraints.
Sure, I agree. But if we just leave it adequate, if you look at line 19 on the screen, they have not been adequately addressed by the previous grants. We're looking to get supplemental grants to those businesses that had a more significant impact or loss. And if we just change that to the ones that were restricted by limitations and caps of the previous grants, and then you come up with a new cap number would that clarify that and give it a little more pointed focus?
So, you know, my only other concern on that is that we also heard from a business that didn't reach the cap yet still has significant need. So in other words, the supplemental that we're implementing right now is not really helping them, but this would, right? Because as long as they're able to show that there's unmet need, we don't want to make it contingent upon that they reached a cap or not.
Okay, just trying to understand what this paragraph or this sentence was saying. Yeah. Okay.
Zach?
I just sent the committee some language. I've been thinking a lot about, Joan, right before you came in, we were talking about the 30% threshold. And I've been thinking about how we can sort of revisualize that as a threshold for businesses being eligible for this. And then also now looking at the supplemental grant, which is really targeted towards critical Vermont economic sectors. And so I had a suggestion, and I'd be curious about your thoughts, which is to eliminate the 30% threshold altogether, and instead to slow down the process, get rid of the first come, first serve basis, create an application process that is based on demonstrated need. And so we're evaluating the vitality of the businesses themselves and whether they serve in a certain, and this would be up to the ACCD to determine the specifics for the application period. But what that would do is I think it would solve, the new business issue. It would solve the supplemental grant issue, and it would solve the other issues we have for companies that are clearly essential to our economy, but have not met that threshold yet. I know this goes contrary to what we've been talking about in the past, which is that first come, first serve basis. But I think we've all seen, based on the amount of funds that we still have available, that I think we have the room now to slow down a little bit in making sure we're getting the right amount of money into the right sectors of the economy. And I'd be curious what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think we spent a lot of time talking about this after committee yesterday, and we are thinking that, look, we did everything for the right reasons initially, which was to get money out the door and to do it in as systematic a fashion as possible. Okay, great, we did that. We know there's unmet need, and now this tranche will have to take an analytical approach about true unmet need. So it might encapsulate it, we'll still capture the 30% and more, but yeah, I think we're amenable to that.
I'll send you the language proposals and see, and that I just shared with the committee. And by the way, I just shared that all with everybody.
Okay.
Okay, maybe that's something we can work in with Joan and David and see what we can come up with. Lynn?
Yeah, thank you. I had a thought that was not quite as far extended out as Zach's, but is in the same vein. I think that the less prescriptive, descriptive, and looking at just language, I think that we really ought to give ACCD and whoever else in this group that has been, the agencies have been doing this work, that we should give them the discretion. They know what they've been looking at. They have made judgments and seen where people have fallen through the cracks. And I think that the more we quibble over words, the harder it is. We don't really know. We haven't seen it, but Joan and all the people at ACCD and probably a bunch of people at tax have seen it. And this is really, they know where that looks like people are falling through the cracks and what those needs are. And giving them the discretion, I think, is the best way to go. I don't know if I would get rid of a cap, 30% loss. Maybe you should make it 25. I don't know. There may be other language you can use, but that's where my feelings are. I don't think we have time to wait until everybody gets around to getting their applications in. I think that the time is of the essence. It's only 3 more months. It's the end of, September is the weekend, and then it's Labor Day, and then it's, Columbus Day or whatever we call it now. And then there's Thanksgiving. I mean, there's lots and lots of times that are not going to be available. We need to get started on this and give people a chance to get this stuff in, and then our money out the door.
Great point.
Okay. So let's see where we can go with those thoughts. And I'll let you and Joan and Charlie and David just see what we can do to work on some of the thoughts that we just heard. Don't know that. I think the next spot is the grants for ski areas.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, in discussing this yesterday with ACCD, and one of the thoughts we were grappling with is, do we break out monies for different pots? And to Lynn's point, the more flexible we are, the easier it is to administer. However, there's also looking at grants to Vermont ski areas is the question, how much money would go there? And working through that as a committee, if we got $73 million, do we want to see 70 million go to ski areas? And I don't think that's the case. And this probably wouldn't be how it would be administered anyway, but in providing some guidance around that, this is probably the one area that we may want to put a dollar amount on in calling out as to how much money we want to allocate to ski areas to provide for COVID related spacing and safety techniques. So it's just something to think about as we were wrestling yesterday with, okay, is it 23 million for sole proprietors, 50 million for restaurant and lodging, and then, but what's for the ski areas? So it's, that's why we just presented one pot of 73 million, and then all these different interests could weigh into that, but perhaps we carve out the ski area separately. So that's, I just want to lay that out for the committee to consider as we were talking about that yesterday.
Thoughts? Stephanie?
Just wondering in ski areas, if we're going to look at Vermont-owned ski areas versus ski areas owned by national corporations, those should be looked at any differently. Just a thought and a comment.
And if the criteria above was for businesses that are domiciled in Vermont, that changes the applicant pool. So I'm not sure if this was specific, if this is included. David, in the construct of your language, do ski areas have to be domiciled in Vermont?
No, again, that the first category is more more closely follows the tack of S350 and 966 to the extent that while it can be any kind of business and it doesn't have to have employees, it still has to be Vermont domiciled or have its primary place of business. That's a separate category from 2 and 3. I mean, 2, because 2, you already have to have received, an emergency economic recovery grant. You still meet that criterion as well. So this one, number 3, specific to ski areas, is really its own animal, and it is not subject to those other criteria.
Are ski areas including Nordic areas as well, or just alpine?
I mean, I think Nordic skiing counts. I hope. One of my, one of the things I can add to my real Vermonter pile is I do both kinds of skiing. I'm a complete flatlander.
Okay, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is more for Joan. Joan, can you explain to us how this got into this bill? How the ski resorts wormed their way into this?
Well, I honestly don't know. I'm sorry to say that as an answer, but I know that my colleagues at the agency, thought that this would be a great addition, but I do think it could be covered under the general 73. Like, I do think it is a subset of the general 73, and I apologize if that's counter to anything that you've heard from anyone else. I honestly was not part of, the kind of the genesis of how that entered in. I mean, I wouldn't say worm way. These are important entities that we want to see continuing to thrive in the state. And also we are recognizing that it may not be the robust ski season that at least at the beginning of last year was, we don't anticipate it's going to be that. So we just want to be there to offer assistance where we could. The reason why it's probably stand out separate is that it's not necessarily based on unmet need, but rather improvements and things that have to be made to amend to allow for social distancing and all the other types of amendments that would have to be made, probably more so on the downhill side than on the Nordic side, since there's a lot more space when you're out in the field on your own, as opposed to in a lift, as an example. So I don't know if that's helpful to you, but I do think we could probably cover it within the 73. I didn't think that there was a separate ask or set aside in there, but again, forgive me if I'm wrong.
Okay. To David, just to clarify, because I don't think I got it all, and that is to Representative Kimball's question with respect to being domiciled in the state of Vermont. Can we exclude those companies that are not domiciled in the state of Vermont from getting these grants?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that gives me a little bit more comfort against an idea that I don't really like. But I'd rather have the money. I see you laughing, Stephanie. I just think, just to the root of this whole thing, if we don't have people in accommodations, ski resorts, they don't have any customers, and that's where this money ought to go. So I've just got to throw that in there, and that's my feeling on this. The ski resorts and the ski resort owners are not going to be on food stamps this coming winter. They're going to do just fine. Thank you.
Well, I would beg to differ. I will tell you that we have a ski area in my area that is a very good employer for this area, number one. Number two, they're hemorrhaging $65,000 a week in payroll, and they have no consumers going to the mountain. And that's the problem. It's the same issue that lodging facilities have. It's the same issue that the restaurants have, that they don't have the bodies coming in paying for meals or paying for whatever they're giving. Even the golf course is slow. So they are, in my opinion, just as important as anybody else. We have to remember that they are good employers. So I guess I beg to differ that they are important to our economy as well. And the problem that we've had is that there's a revenue cap at $20 million, and they have not been able to access any of the grant dollars.
Mr. Chairman, I stand corrected. And my major concern is that money stays in Vermont and Vermont businesses and Vermont skiing areas.
Well, I think even ski areas that are owned by bigger corporations in Colorado still need the assistance to provide the safety that their customers need. And so I'm sure that they're going through the same issues that everybody else is going through. No matter how large they are, there's only so much money that you have in reserves, and if you have no cash coming in, or very little, those reserves go down pretty fast.
Mr. Chairman, and the language of the bill, it says that it's going to go towards safety measures,
right?
But it's not spelled out.
You can't.
Well, we can spell it out. We're just right now looking at that language. Lynn?
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with the chair. If you don't have ski areas open, you aren't going to have people staying in your lodges anyway, because they don't come here to, walk down the road in the middle of winter. They come here to ski. This is the attraction. Nordic skiing is a wonderful sport, and but there's a whole lot more distance, and it's a more the loneliness of the long distance skier basically is very different than the guy who gets, or the families who get on ski lifts and want to stay in a hotel or eat in the lodge, or go stay in the motel, or eat in the restaurants locally. The needs are different. There is medical safety issues that go into alpine skiing. And they have to have very similar kinds of accommodations to cover the COVID issues as anyone else that's doing any kind of medical care. There's a whole lot of things that go into it. I really agree that this is the $20 million issue of the cap that we heard yesterday from the Woodstock Inn also couldn't get any money. And I'm sure they're not alone. And they also have people who come up here and stay here because they ski, and they go to Killington, and they go all kinds of places that we can't even begin to think about, but that's what they do, is they come here and that's where they stay. So that's true at all of our big, iconic, larger, more higher revenue places that aren't being hit with this money. So, they all have employees. Over at the Stowe Lodge, they've got that big fancy lodge that's got hundreds and hundreds of employees, and they're not all making big bucks. They're working as waiters and waitresses and in maintenance, and they're shoveling the snow out and making the place nice. And they need those jobs too, whether it's college kids or older people or people who've been around working in the back offices. So I think that we really have to be, or maintenance, and keep the place going. So I don't quite understand this is one of our major winter employers and our major winter businesses. And if we can't have skiing, I don't know where we're going to be in this state, because it will affect and ripple down to everything else in their immediate areas. Every community that's within 10 or 20 miles of a ski area has an impact with this. So I think that maybe we ought to sit down and talk about, I mean, getting rid of the cap is probably the first thing. That's the most important thing. But, you know, whether it's putting a cap on it for just the ski areas or some other kind of way. But I think that, again, the ACCD and TACs are going to understand what they've seen and where the gaps are. And I think they're going to be able to use their judgment. I mean, I'm partial to a Vermont ski area, something that's owned and run by Vermonters, but you know, a lot of our ski areas wouldn't exist at all if we didn't have these large companies that came in and bought them out and keep them going. So that's another thought we have to take into account. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna somewhat echo what Lynn's saying too. In terms of the cap, although I will say, so my reasoning for questioning this is more of a philosophical view about the way government operates, and I think that's why we eliminated funding for the Vermont Biking Association. Why we just eliminated funding for the convention center thing is because it's not our role to support specific private industries or businesses, but to more look at how we can create an application process that is open to the ski industries, recognizing that they are an essential part of the Vermont economy. And so I don't support giving money directly to the ski areas, but also think that if they are in need and they do service a very essential part of our economy, that we should get rid of that $20 million cap. But I'm also suggesting that we're doing, evaluating the demonstrated need, because we heard from the Woodstock Inn yesterday. I don't know what their current financial situation is. Charlie would know more about this because he lives there, but I don't think the Woodstock Inn is in need of any money right now, and I don't know what their reserves are. But the same goes for these ski industries. If they have massive reserves, or even what am I thinking about? Fill an endowment of some sort. They don't need state funding, and a review of demonstrated need would show that, and it would eliminate them from the process. But if they really do need that money, then we should be able to get it to them. So I again agree. Yeah. Anyway, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay. I think that, I agree. Any business should show a demonstrated need and demonstrate business interruption, business losses because of COVID issues. Joan, what are your thoughts, or what is the agency's thoughts on this 20 million cap?
Yeah, we are aware that we've left some people out, and we have been talking about including them. So I think that kind of the spirit of our conversation yesterday, as we were working on the language, was to consider this as one large pool from which we will take care of those that we didn't take care of in the first round, right? So we recognize there are people left out. They recognize that we paid people and it wasn't enough. So, in the spirit of that, we want to take a look at need, not have it just as a flat kind of percentage of revenue.
Right.
And we totally recognize the ski areas are important, and we don't want to lose them. We don't want them to close down. And it doesn't matter how large you are. Large businesses are going into bankruptcy. So we're not basing this on a size, you're too big to fail. That's certainly not true. And so we're sympathetic and want to do something. We want this sector to be there when COVID is over.
So if we're, I mean, if that's something that you're looking at, raising the revenue cap to try to get some of these other, and they're in the hospitality industry, into the ability to apply and receive some grant dollars, some help.
Yeah.
I guess it's important for us to not specify any dollar amounts that you just have that 73 million, because if we specify 50 million is going into the supplemental grants, they can't apply to that because they didn't receive a grant before. So then you're stuck with 23 million trying to get to sole proprietors and everybody else.
Yeah, it starts getting problematic, especially when we can't predict without a doubt the appetite on the different segments. And so it just ends up getting more problematic about the different funding sources. So it's rather be like one pool, let's take care of those that had been left out. And in some cases it'll be a supplement, in some cases it'll be a first time applicant.
Okay, I think that's sounds like a sound approach. Heather has joined us, so why don't we have a discussion with Heather for probably half an hour or so. Let's try to go back to this for the last half hour and see where we fall and what kind of where we need to go from here. So Heather, welcome. Glad to have you back again.
Happy to be here. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. So I think yesterday when we dropped off, we talked about the consumer stimulus money, but we never did get into the tourism marketing dollars that you're requesting. So maybe we could hear a little bit more about your thoughts on that and probably some questions and answers on that.
Sure, and I would be also happy to pick up the conversation. I know there were some concerns about the rules around gift cards, and I just wanted to clarify. So if you wanted me to start there, I'd be happy to do, or we can come back to that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, I just wanted to clarify that these are not actually gift cards, and that's why we've, made the distinction that it's not the same thing. It's not the same rules that apply, and this is really more accurately called a savings offer. And that is, I apologize for the confusion just in the language of using that shortcut. But this is really, it's the equivalent of, it's a discount, it's a coupon, it's a way to save coming into those businesses. But it's more aligned to how folks would think about a limited time offer to save at your local businesses. Yes, it's an incentive to help you come in and think about those purchasing decisions, but it's not the same thing as a consumer buying, using their money to purchase a set of services or goods that they would then redeem at a later time. So I think that's just an important distinction for folks to understand. And that's why it's not falling into those consumer protections around gift cards specifically. So hopefully that just provides some clarification.
Thank you. Questions on Heather's clarifications for us? Okay, thanks. So let's talk about tourism marketing.
Sure. So the intent of this additional investment in tourism marketing is following the same theme of understanding exactly how hard this sector has been hit, how really desperate we are to make sure that Vermont does not lose any additional market share, knowing that other states around us are competing for these same visitors as we go into the fall and winter seasons. We've talked before about the level of funding that VDTM receives compared to those that we're competing against. So this is really a recognition that, now is the time more than ever for us to be competitive in the market. And the more funds that we have at our disposal, the more that we can get that attention, that we can get those eyeballs, whether it's either in reach and frequency, the kinds of measures that we've talked about before. This level of money would enable us to do things that we've never been able to do before, whether that be broadcast television or going into the New York City market, or just, really big splashes in terms of getting that brand awareness out there to the market. We've always been very frugal with the money that we've had and keep it very targeted. We would follow the same approaches to make sure that we can, we can just show the return on the investment of the money. But, when we're talking about the level of impact that the tourism sector has suffered, our response to it, we feel like needs to be proportional in making sure that, not only folks who have visited Vermont before, but folks who, may not have thought about Vermont, just because maybe it just wasn't on their radar and they've always gone someplace else. We want to make sure that, we have the ability to really bring those visitors here and all the economic activity that comes with them, to do everything we can to help this sector. So that's the broad brush of it. We have included in the legislative language that, there's also an opportunity here for us to support our Vermont producers. We know that out-of-state visitors, they love to support the state in that way as well, in terms of buying Vermont products when they're here. It's another way for us to, again, those businesses that have been affected by COVID, which is, what all this relief money is intended for. It's just another dynamic of using marketing and brand awareness to bring economic activity to those businesses. And then, there's a piece that there's a relocation message that we can weave into this in terms of how the state is positioned to be able to solve our demographic crisis with additional residents. This is just sort of a layer of the messaging as we're reaching out and making sure that folks are thinking about Vermont and how they can think about Vermont in their future plans, that this additional investment would help us to reach that many more people. So that's the broad idea of it. We are putting together, some specifics of, the kind of tactics that we might use that I'd be happy to share. But, also happy to have a conversation about that in terms of, what folks are thinking.
Okay. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Heather, when we talked about this, I don't remember when we last talked about it. There was discussion on your end of splitting up the marketing dollars regionally. Have you stepped back from that? Because, and here's my concern, is that, heretofore, you guys, what you told, if memory serves me, you guys did it all in-house and did a pretty good job with a small budget. And I'm wondering if you're gonna go back to the methodology, and do it from your vantage point or split it up, because I'll tell you that, I've spoken with the regional chambers down here and they don't want anything to do with it.
Don't have anything to do with
trying to figure out a marketing strategy. The state of Vermont and your office has done a pretty good job, and they're just afraid to even put their hands on it.
So with what we are envisioning, and not only with this potentially this new investment, but with the money that has already been allocated for marketing, we have invested in a new creative campaign that we will be launching in about 2 weeks. And part of that campaign includes a toolkit of those creative assets that we can share with our regional partners. So, as we've talked about, and I think this speaks to the concern that you just mentioned, is that, the role of the state is really that big brand awareness piece. It's to get those eyeballs thinking about Vermont. And there's other opportunities down the purchasing funnel for regions to really promote, what makes them special and specific. But the way that we can help support all those regions is by bringing that attention to the state. So, what we thought is that as we have this opportunity to make an investment like we haven't had in the past, is that with this new toolkit of assets, it just makes it even easier for regions to plug into this larger campaign that they can then use, again, to shine a light on their particular region. So I would hope that would serve some of your concerns.
Well, Heather, what kind of reaction have you gotten from, for instance, the Bennington Chamber and South Shire, and their willingness to jump on board with this, and for that matter, in a broader stroke, other regions where it's going to be spread out? I'm very curious.
So we have gotten, broad support from, if I could just say, stakeholders as a term in terms of partners we work with. We are about to share with them this creative. They have not seen it yet, but they have been involved in the discovery process in terms of, how that campaign should be structured and, what are the core messages, helping us hone in on, that's the kind of, discovery that's a term that we use just to really gather input and feedback as to exactly what the goals of the campaign are. How are we gonna define success and so forth. And so through the Travel Recreation Council, which includes folks representation from all over the state and other stakeholders, we have done that outreach. And like I said, everybody's excited for this toolkit idea. It helps them do their jobs. It makes it that much easier. And that way they can follow the lead of the state and just get that umbrella effect of that we're all speaking and the same message.
Okay, and this may be getting too far into the weeds, but are there any broad strokes that you can provide for us with respect to what the marketing will be? In the past we had I can't remember who it was who came in and told us, that 4 different areas that were most successful in attracting people to the state of Vermont. And one was the number one was weddings, then history, arts, and music.
We definitely include those themes. So when we look at our different tactics, we're looking at the types of marketing vehicles that we use. And so we spread that out so we don't have we're not doing just digital ads, or we're not doing just native advertising, which is, paid editorial, or we're not doing just video, or whatever it happens to be, not just out of home, which is billboards. We look at several different tactics and strategies to make sure that we're hitting not only different markets and what's most appropriate to them, but by interest area, which is what you're getting at. So we include those themes in not only the content that we have on the Vermont vacation site, so that that consumer journey, it starts with that big brand awareness, then it's, getting it down to how do you make that final purchase. One thing that I can share with folks is that we just recently updated the Vermont vacation website with a new stay and play directory. This was a joint project with the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, but it's just a new planning tool that's been in the works over the summer. We're doing lots of things at the same time to try and make the case for Vermont as compelling as we can. There's now a new directory so that when people do come to the website, they can actually, as they're looking through lodging properties, there is a book now button. It goes to the individual property to finalize the sale, but it just gives us that additional level of detail as to, was that sale made? Like, how can we really prove that those marketing efforts translate into an actual purchase? We actually are also using a new vendor for programmatic advertising. So this is through the digital platform, those ads that you'll see pop up on different websites. One of the things that they're able to do that we weren't able to do before with more specificity is the return on ad spend, so that we will be able to have a better direct line between the amount of marketing dollars that went through that tactic and then what those people actually spent when they came here.
Last question. When it comes to, allocating these funds regionally, has it been mapped out, that there'll be links for lodging and restaurants and all that?
So, we promote the state on a very broad level, and through the Vermont Vacation website where we direct that traffic, we provide information about all the regions, all the different lodging opportunities, all the different types of activities that you could have in Vermont. So we don't proportionalize it per region or per activity, but we drive it to that central location where all of those different topics are represented.
Thank you.
Charlie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Heather. Yeah, I had a chance to read your restart marketing summary yesterday, and it was great. So it was $500,000 for the pilot program for the, not gift card, but the savings
offer.
Mechanism offer, okay. And then 500,000 for the regional marketing programs, and those applications are due on Monday, is that correct? Or
That's correct.
for the different partners, and then $1.5 million, and you've spent some money there in developing those marketing assets. So it's great to see that you've used that money to develop those marketing assets, and that's what you're really trying to push forward. So it was great to see that that was there, and I think you heard from us in the spring that that's where we thought there would be great benefit to developing that library of assets to utilize. But I guess my questions are, $10 million, a lot of money. And so there are many legislators with whom I've been having conversations about, well, how can we even spend that much money? So that's one question. A second question, in the time that we have until December 30th or December 20th, the second piece is, why are we marketing Vermont when we're not really that open? And how can we bring that many people to Vermont now? So that's another question I hope you can answer, because it's like, and this is so much more money than we've ever spent on marketing, just trying to understand why that much by now. And so I guess those are my two questions really, is that, can you really spend that much between now and December, and why now, if we're not fully open?
Yeah, no, great question. I would say in terms of, can we spend that money, it's actually quite easy to spend that amount of money. And I don't mean that facetiously, but we're not going to buy a Super Bowl ad, but that costs many millions of dollars for just one ad, depending on where it goes. So if for instance, we don't ever look at could we have a television ad on the nightly news? It just is never in our ballpark. But there are many opportunities where the price tag is just so many times greater. And the reason for that is because it reaches so many more people. So it's really not there's many avenues that we could go down to spend that money. Just for instance, we had talked about, we've done station takeovers in the past, when we've had an opportunity to get that at a discount, whether that's in transit stations in Boston as an example. That costs, if without a discount, that costs, millions of dollars to do that. So there are lots of sort of high ticket tactics that we could use to spend that money within the time frame. And the reason why they cost more is because they do reach that many more people. And specifically with the New York market, one of the reasons why we focus on Boston is not only because it's also a core market, but there's just economies of scale there in terms of the type of advertising that we can buy. And we've never really been able to make as big a play for the New York market because there's so much more competitive media there that it's just so much more expensive for us. So it's we want to be responsible for that. We're not going to spend it on one $10 million ad. But I think there's many things that we could do that we've never even been able to conceive of because the price, the ticket, the prices just start so much higher. I think in terms of, why now, it's that we need, every visitor that we can get. Yes, there are travel restrictions, and, yes, there are, ongoing challenges for folks to come here, but it's really about making sure that Vermont is not forgotten, and that residual value of brand awareness doesn't necessarily start and end with the one time you see that ad. It's are folks going to be thinking about Vermont at all? And maybe they can't come 2 weeks from now because they need to quarantine ahead of time, but are they at least thinking about Vermont as a vacation spot? And if we're not there saying that, then other destinations are going to be saying that. And so, they may not book that trip right away. We would love for them to do that. I mean, ultimately, that's what we need. We need, those visitors to come here as soon as they can to support these businesses. But the residual value of making sure that they're thinking about Vermont, if they come, if we are able to achieve that reach and achieve that frequency so that that seed is planted in their head, that we will reap the benefits of that even beyond this immediate time frame.
And if I could interject a little bit, I know you focused on the visitor element, but in this time where we're seeing large software companies allowing their people to work indefinitely remotely, that this would be an opportunity to make it known that Vermont is the place to work remotely. Mm-hmm. So it's also about recruiting workers It's also about recruiting workers for businesses here. It's about recruiting workers that are remote working for Google or whomever. And this is an opportunity that we've never had, as Commissioner Pellin has said, never had to make the type of media buys that we could to take advantage of our safety and our health and, prudent management of this crisis.
I guess the one place where I push back is we already have evidence that people are moving to Vermont now in this pandemic to either get to a safer place and taking advantage of what may be, in their eyes, lower price real estate than in the urban areas and high-speed broadband. So in my school system alone, we have 90 new students on a 900 student base, which is incredible. So I know that this is happening throughout the rest of the state. I don't know how much we need to do to advertise right now in order to get people to consider moving to Vermont. Just because the fundamentals are there. People are saying, where do I go? Where's the safest place to be? I'm going to Vermont. And then we have to balance tourism and leisure tourism with that too at the same time. It's really tough. And I understand what you're trying to accomplish and just getting that mind share of people that are thinking about where could I go either on vacation or go to work remotely because I can work from anywhere. But so it's always a fundamental argument about, is this money well spent? And are the fundamentals working? And right now it seems to be working in attracting residents, not necessarily companies, but in terms of residents. I guess that's where I just, on that piece.
My only, further pushback on that is just that it's sort of like we're reacting to people rather than proactively targeting big major markets. And so maybe we don't need to, but do we know what it would be like if we did make the effort? It's sort of like, we often say that Vermont sells itself, it's great, it's safe, but not really, it hasn't really shown that. Now, I'd love to see the population changes this year. I know that we hear an awful lot about real estate being up, but what is the absolute change and delta in the number of people? I guess we won't know that until next year, but why be reactive and not take advantage of this opportunity to be proactive?
I think there's also an element of, when we talk about being diversified in our strategies in marketing, earned media is one of the strategies is, how can you get other people to write about you and get that third party validation? And here's an opportunity where, yes, some people are thinking about Vermont and it's safe. So here's our opportunity to make the most of that and to build on what we've been able to achieve, whether it's in the press or in, the beginning of that mindset that folks are moving here. I would say now's the time more than ever to reinforce that with this kind of investment.
Stephanie.
Heather, thanks. My question is about hiring the work that needs to get done. And are you planning on hiring Vermont media companies that have also been hurt during this pandemic in order to help these companies in Vermont?
So we have, through the work we've done over the summer, we definitely have invested in local media outlets to get out, some of the in-state and travel around the state type of messages to encourage that. With the regional marketing stimulus program that Representative Kimball just mentioned, which is the $10,000 grants to communities to do, what they're looking at for, what will work best for their region. One of our criteria is, a preference for local media to make sure that we are, using the spending power that we are enabling to support those outlets as well. When it comes to it really depends on, what's the reach of the outlet. So, our out-of-state efforts wouldn't use those companies, but for anything we're doing in-state, yes, absolutely.
I'm sorry, I should have been more specific. I'm actually really interested in the creative and marketing companies that are in Vermont who would create the messages for you or who would create the products for you that you would then be using for whatever media outlets you're thinking about purchasing or the work that you're going to do when you're going to do this 3-month, $10 million media blitz. Yep. Are you hiring Vermont businesses to help create the products that you want to and the message to put out there?
Yes, we are. So our media buying firm is based in Vermont. Our creative firm has an office in Vermont. What are other contract service? We use photographers based in Vermont. So yes, we do use Vermont.
That would make
vendors.
me feel a lot better about all of this, is that know that you're employing Vermont businesses to do this Vermont marketing.
Yes. The bulk of the expense though really is for media, and it's not for contracted services, but yes, we are using vendors as I just described.
Christie, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Commissioner Pelham, for coming in today and explaining a little bit about these programs. We've heard these conversations before within the last couple of days regarding the amount of money appropriate that you're looking to appropriate towards the programs you're looking to fund. I think if we're going to be able to explain this to constituents and people around the state compared to businesses and maybe hospitality sector, is where did the 10 million number come from? If we can speak a little bit about the makeup of that, and I know we've got the 50 million for the consumer incentives. Just, and you explained a little bit about that yesterday, but just the 10 million. How did we arrive at that? I'm sure it wasn't a dart at thrown at the dartboard. There's some logic behind that, and I think we might need that to be able to explain it to the people that are going to be asking the questions.
Well, it is an estimation. It's really a recognition of, we came in here, earlier this spring, what could we do with $1 million that would really help the department do so much more than we've done before? This is, I would say that, we need to do 10 times that. And it's a recognition of what the challenges are ahead, and how much more important it is now more than ever to make that investment, to make sure that Vermont is seen, and that we don't lose any market share. And so that's where that number comes from. It's really a recognition of what it's going to take to make sure that Vermont stays top of mind.
I'm struggling to be convinced, but I'm reluctant.
Well, I mean, it's the, that's the budget of New Hampshire, so that's one way to say, like, do we want to compete with New Hampshire? So, we've talked about that. It's, even $10 million is basically half of what Maine spends, theirs is at 17, 18. So, it's the realm of that, of like, how do we compete at that level?
Right. And I know earlier in the year, you when we were talking about that $1 million, we alluded to the fact of we're behind the 8 ball when it comes to the states surrounding us.
Yeah.
But so I appreciate that, but it's just to hear it again and try to get our arms around what the $10 million is going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Morris just touched on something that we talked about earlier in the year, and the amount of money that Maine spent and what the return on investment was. Do you recall, Heather?
I recall our conversations, yes.
Do you remember what the return on investment was? What was it? They spent $13 million and they saw X number of millions in return, in contrast to the year before?
I don't know that I know of Maine's return on investment calculations. I know what their budget is. I don't have the inner workings of how they measure that success.
Well, with the two elephantine memories, Lynn Dickinson and Charlie Kimball, they might be able to recall it. Can you help us out there, Lynn or Charlie?
I do remember that it had a graph.
I knew you would.
It was a graph that started like this, and then as soon as Maine State went like this, and then it went like that. And I think it had to do with the fact that they did a reinvestment of the money that they got in whatever the equivalent of rooms and meals is. And when they reinvested that into their marketing efforts, which is why it got to be bigger, like twice as much as it had previously been, you started to see the impact in that graph that went uphill. I believe Heidi Sherman was the one who brought those graphs to us and did a lot of the research on that, and part of her effort to get that, the marketing, to get, for the tourism industry, her Tourism Day efforts to get more money from the money we generate out of rooms and meals and lodging and all those things, and reinvest it so it would grow. It would be a multiplier for, and it was a pretty big multiplier. It started out a little slow, but then it went up in the graph. It was pretty easy to see.
Well, thank you, Lynn. I knew I could count on you.
Sorry, I was thinking more in terms of specific marketing metrics, but you're right. We had those conversations about the much broader, other economic indicators looking at.
Yeah, the return on investment that Maine had, and as echoing other members here, and you, Heather, and Joan, this we need to make sure that Vermont, is not forgotten, and I don't think they will forget us. But to say, hey, we're still here, and you know what? We're really, really safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there is an impact, and I do think, I didn't ask it before, but because Joan brought it up, but I do think there is an impact on the people who are moving out of the cities, and they're renting properties. If they're not moving here, they're renting properties and spending the summer here, working out of condos and playing golf and doing whatever is available. And it's happening in the southern part of the state, maybe more than others now, like Charlie and his 90 extra children down in Woodstock, which is a good thing. But it's even happening in places like Jay Peak, where it's getting people from New York who've spent the summer up there. And they may be there for a while. I mean, who knows? And they may want to move here permanently. It's a very common thing for people in these cities to do this. The red areas are really red and they don't like it.
Yeah, and I would just...
We're not hearing you, Jim.
Comment, except including yours truly. I was on 9/11. Yours truly, who was born and raised in Bennington. After 9/11, we saw a huge spike in people from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts who moved to Vermont.
I mean, I would just add on it to say that, Vermont doesn't often make it into the headlines, and, we are making it into the national conversation about how we have handled this pandemic. And it, to me, it's if not now, when? Like, people are starting to think about Vermont, and we need to make sure that that sticks in their mind and stays there for the long-term benefit. And here's an opportunity, with this money that we can spend in the next couple of months to reinforce, Vermont's position in the greater market.
Christy.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The conversation just preceding this leads me to ask the question: is this is a one-time funding of $10 million if it go through? What are the expectations going to be for following the years? We drop back to our limited budget. And if this marketing program takes 1, 2, or 3 years to have the effect, what's the danger here next year if we aren't able to support the marketing budget to this extent?
I don't see it as a danger. I mean, I would see it as a lost opportunity if we couldn't continue to fund tourism. But, I think we need to, again, take advantage of whatever moment we have to make this kind of a splash. We'll be able to show what marketing, through, I was drilling down to the more like specifics in terms of, marketing metrics and so forth, but, we can show the additional traffic that we've seen, hopefully the additional conversions we've seen, so that this if we're able to reinforce, what it means to invest in marketing. Yes, this is a long-term effort. But, having this short-term, shot in the arm, I can't see any downsides to that. I would just hope that it would just further reinforce, not only what it takes to, what a marketing investment looks like, and the scale that we might be thinking of, but also just how important it is for us to support this industry, this tourism infrastructure that you know, is throughout the state. I mean, it's not concentrated, you know, again, as we've talked about, in one area versus the other, and the spillover effect from that kind of importation of dollars really affects businesses on the very local level and in every community. And, you know, we can't lose that. Like, you know, again, with some of the other conversations, you know, these businesses, we need them to be there so that we can just maintain this infrastructure that we depend on for, you know, thousands of jobs, and, you know, communities that depend on these businesses to provide that level of economic activity.
Okay, and then my final comment, and I think I'll take a back seat again. It really, I think it would behoove us, or me anyway, if we had some sort of budgetary documentation of what you were expecting, if you're going to spend 3 million on TV ads, or 7 million, or if we had, or radio ads, or it sounds like you're going to Boston. You mentioned this previously last spring, and that putting signs up in the train stations and stuff. I could get my arms around this a little bit better if I just had some sort of budgetary suggestions that you were leaning toward, so that we could use that for explanation. And I don't know if you have that, or if you can provide it at some point in the future.
We can provide some broad framework. Yes, absolutely.
Any more questions for Heather? Heather, what are other jurisdictions doing as far as tourism marketing right now? New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts.
I mean, they all have their own version of a restart campaign. You know, we're not alone in the challenges that we face, and our nearest neighbors are feeling the same thing. So, you know, I certainly hear that, you know, folks in Vermont see Maine's ads. You know, it is real. You know, there are those investments are being made by our competitors. I could try and follow up and find out exactly, you know, how much they're spending. That they don't always necessarily share that, but if that would be helpful.
I'm just wondering if you know, they've increased their marketing dollars right now at this point. Although, you know, New Hampshire's 100%. I don't know what Maine is, but I'm still worried that with keeping our occupancy rates down, and I understand the full reason why we're doing that, that along with what Charlie said earlier, is that I don't know that it's helpful at this time. And I know there's a need to keep our name our name out there. I think our name is out there pretty good for being such a safe state at this point. I think, like others, I'm struggling to. If it was at any other point, if we were right out of this and we were 100% and things are ready to roll, I would not hesitate to say, let's pull the trigger and let's get the word out. But I'm really hesitant, and I can tell you that I hear a lot from Vermonters when they're seeing all these license plates that are not Vermont plates, and people are, there's a big fear factor going on right now with Vermonters. So I just worry about that you know, we're on one hand, we're saying, you know, we are really hesitant about opening the state up, and on the other hand, then we start a tourism campaign to come to Vermont. So I see those two issues at loggerheads, I guess.
Well, we include in all of our outreach, you know, right now, what the travel restrictions are, what the expectations are for visitors when they come to the state, you know, the safety and, you cleaning protocols, the guest experiences, what that visitors have, when they come to the state is really very regulated. What I hear, from the lodging industry is that, they have created a very safe experience. And so it's our job to make sure that residents understand that as well, is that the folks that are coming here, they are following the rules, and all these safety measures are in place. And what I hear from those same properties is that, yes, we need your help to make sure that folks know that they can still come here. So there's there's clearly a balance between, making sure that they understand the regulations and, all the guidelines that are being followed, so that residents understand that we're doing this in a safe and responsible manner. But, we can't go too far the other way, that folks feel like, oh, Vermont's off limits. That there's the balance there in our messaging, so that folks just understand and really understand, what is at risk if we lose these tourism properties, and the role that they play in their communities, so that, we want to be, and we are, it's a difficult situation, getting that balance, that residents understand that we can do this safely, but also that, these are the properties that are employing their neighbors and paying property taxes. And, if their business goes under and they're an innkeeper, they're losing their home, and there are real difficult decisions all around that folks are having to make it through this pandemic. But, we don't want to kind of group anybody into large categories and say that we can't do this because of that, and vice versa.
Yeah. Still, there's perception sometimes is 2020. And the fear factor that's out there is real. And, sometimes it's not warranted, but other times it is. And you're right, it's a big balance. It's a big balancing act. And I think the struggle that I think most of us, or everybody's having, is $10 million the right amount to spend at this point? So, Jean?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate what you said, because in Burlington, we've got 10,000 students from out of state here coming in. And I've heard from so many of my constituents, and that I think as we navigate the fall semester with the incoming students, I think everyone will start feeling a little better. But I know that we're scared in Burlington. It is, we and unfortunately they are not responsible people coming to visit us who would follow the rules. They're college kids. And when you go down to Church Street now, I'm seeing a lot of people sitting on stoops, and they're in the student ghetto, no masks, shoulder to shoulder. So I just want to support that. It's not just up in the Northeast Kingdom, but it's down here too. It's a little, and I'm sure down in Bennington, you've got the same sense. These are challenging times. So thank you.
Yeah, they are. And I agree. It'll be interesting. There is this time period where we do have those college students coming in. But, when we think about leisure travelers, I would also encourage residents to look at, our nearest neighbors, New York, and, to northern New York, New Hampshire, and Maine, who have not had occupancy restrictions. Some of these locations are actually doing well and inviting visitors, and they have not seen their cases spike. So there is other evidence, around us for very, very similar markets that, there is a way to have leisure travel in a safe manner. And, we can't prove it on the ground yet here in Vermont because we've had some of these restrictions, but we can look at our neighbors and see that, they have, less restrictive policies, and they're not seeing, a big spike in their cases.
Yeah. Maybe that's part of the marketing piece, is to bring that to Vermonters' attention, to understand that other people, our neighbors are having a positive experience in this.
Charlie?
Well, I'm feeling like doom and gloom. I'm getting off.
Charlie?
Oh, I think, Heather, your point right there is perfect, and I know, and I keep harping on it, and I'm sorry, Deputy Secretary Brady, that is key for our leisure travel, is just to open up that occupancy rate, because those property owners are following very good guidelines and keeping their property safe and keeping their guests safe and their employees safe. So they're doing the right things, and just need to open that up.
Lynn?
Maybe we should bring Michael Pichek to come and testify to us, because he's the guru of all this stuff in DFR, but he's the one who's doing the statistics. And, you know, Charlie mentioned this yesterday about places like Cape Cod. And, well, you know, I don't know if anybody sees those ads from Alabama. I would love for Heather to tell me how much those things cost to run night after night after night. And they're red down there. They were in bad shape when they were running those ads. I mean, my husband says he wants to go to Alabama because he wants to see all these wonderful places. But the issue is because it works. But I think Michael Pichek or someone from the governor's office, other than the ACCD people who've been working on this, might be the people to talk to about this.
There are ongoing discussions with the lodging industry, you know, with everybody involved in these restart conversations. So, you know, we'll keep talking about it.
Yeah. Well, and I just wonder where things are going. You know, when we talk about this carve out that we have in the bill at this point for this, and I'm sorry for the pounding in the background, but the carve out we have for the ski areas to provide you know, protection and maybe some tents, that heated tents are going to need and things like that, to me doesn't sound like we're going to be opening up any too soon. So I don't know. I hope we can, and because that's the only way that we're going to get relief to our businesses, but also there'll be a lot of scared residents too. Anything else for Heather? We're coming up to the close of our time. I want to give you a little bit of time off before we go on the floor. I just wondering what next steps are for the language that we went through this morning or this afternoon. What are the thoughts? I know the thought that Zach brought up, I think would work well in the supplemental grants that Joan was talking about. I think we're going to need some different language for that. I think the other question is the 30%, and there's, you know, those two competing ones, 1 month and the other is 3 months look back. How is that going to work? Is there a way to simplify the whole thing? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think Joan indicated that this next round of funding too it requires a little more scrutiny, not just a formulaic approach. So based on need, and Zach's language talks to that.
Would that be for all the grants, or just a supplemental, or?
We're moving in that direction of having one pool, and then from that pool, we will determine need for all of those parties that we outlined initially as being left out.
Or wouldn't that simplify things a whole lot?
It would, for everybody.
That would also accommodate some special snowflakes that just don't fit into any particular program, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, there's some of those that are hanging out there too.
Not to diminish any special snowflakes, because they are special all in their own every right, but. Yeah.
So let's see what kind of language we can develop with David on those points. So is it possible to work with David sometime today and I think we can add an hour on tomorrow. We can start at 11:30 instead of 12:30, and maybe look at a new draft and see what that looks like. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. I don't see David on now, but
I'm here. Can you?
oh, there he is. Keep looking through my. Go ahead, David.
Well, so we didn't finish looking at the balance of the language. There's really
Right.
only one more page that
Okay, let's do that.
I'll show you, and I think it will inform the discussion. I have to tell you that at this point, I feel like we're at decision points, and of course I'm happy to work with whomever, but at this point I don't hear any sort of consensus on what direction this is going. So let me show you the last page of it, and then I raised the point because I think you'll remember, particularly with the S350 conversation, because of the time and because of the unknowns, it was significantly different to the discretion and the guidelines for the agency. And I think that's the continuum that you're still on. It's the extent to which you want to spell specifics out in this statute versus how much are you going to delegate. And if you're looking at the screen now, you should see subsection B, grant amounts and terms. So I took this language from S350, but there's an important difference, I think. It's one word, but you'll see in B1, it says the agency shall establish standards for determining the amount of grant awards. That says formula in S350. And that is an intentional change I made based on our discussions, because I remember the conversations around S350, and there were formulae originally offered. It was really hard for people to decide what the formula should be. And ultimately they said, we want a formula, but we need the agency to figure out what's appropriate. And as this has moved to be, and even today's conversations underscore this, as this is moving away from a formulaic approach and more to a demonstration of need and more flexibility necessary to catch who remains in the pool, I changed that word formula to standards here with that intent, I guess. So I want to flag that for your attention. B2 is the same. They still shall consider whether and by how much to adjust grants based on whether there's other assistance. The guidelines here, you'll remember in S350, there was a long list of very specific guidelines and issues they needed to address. And rather than repopulating those here, I simplify it to just say that they have to adopt and publish guidelines governing the implementation, and that they may coordinate with partners to administer the grants. And that was based on conversations yesterday about needing not only flexibility for new guideline standards. I mean, if they wanted to just reuse the exact ones they have, they could, but those are going to have to change based on the changes in the business criteria. And so they don't fit one for one. And then two, they want the flexibility, but not necessarily at this point a specified duty to go through sub-recipient, sub-grants, sub-pools and all that, whether it's tax or somebody else. So that's the coordination piece. I did include in C2 that the administration award of funds would be pursuant to this section would be subject to the provisions in 966 that are those across the board CRF provisions about the grant requirements, conditions, record keeping, bulletin 3.5, all that stuff that's in 966. And then also sec D through F concerning the administration, the multiple sources of grants, public records and confidentiality. I think that stuff's important. There's one piece below I want to show you, but let me finish here with subsection D. Unencumbered grant funds and transfers. So this says the agency shall combine and administer pursuant to this section any funds in its possession pursuant to 2020 Action Resolve Section 6 that remain unencumbered. So what that means is, to the extent there is money left from the first two bills, which are all consolidated at this point as of August 1st, the agency would combine that with this new money and it would all flow through this new regime or regimen. And that's important because that moves everything down to the 30% level. That allows all of the money to be used for sole proprietors. That allows all the money to be used for businesses without employees. And also on November 15th, if any of those specialized pools are unspent, they will revert back to the agency pursuant to H966. So at that time, any of those reversions, if there are any, would be folded into this as well. So I want you to be aware that all that is going on. Would you like me to flag the two questions below concerning H966, or do you want to save that for later?
I read his lips. He said, go ahead, I think.
Sorry, I keep forgetting I mute myself when they're banging the.
Tanner time. All right, so skipping the marketing piece, there are a couple of places in H966 section 6 that, you know, are on the table. The first is this question of whether to eliminate this language in the Vermont Arts Council appropriation about tax deductible charitable contributions. My understanding is they still have money, and that right now nonprofits are in the larger program are also being sort of subjected to the same standard, and that the notion is to get rid of this limitation. This is the only place, again, in the statute where the language appears in the Arts Council appropriation, but that's the proposal, is to get rid of that. So that's one. Another is, this is just housekeeping to go along with above. This one right here. So this sounds like an administrative nightmare. And I think there's a fundamental question here, whether the purpose of this subdivision was to prevent double dipping, which is already prohibited by the CARES Act, or was it to, you know, limit people to one pot of money? And I remember the concerns being, for instance, the you know, woman-owned, minority-owned business pool versus the general pool, and you can't go to both. I mean, now that all of that is behind us, because most of that money is used up, this may be mostly moot for those pots of money. But this, I mean, technically this language applies across the board. It doesn't just apply to this bill or, you know, this appropriation. And so, you know, as a question whether that's consistent with the intent as broad as it is. And then the other question is, administratively, is this even possible or good policy to limit people to just one CRF funding source? I don't have the answers. I don't know what the right decision is. That's your job, but that's the proposal. I mean, the change here is that the law would say you can't receive CRF funds from more than one source for the same purpose. But if you had two different bases of need and you qualified for two different programs, this would allow you to go and seek those two different sources on those two different bases of need. Technically, right now, that's not allowed under the statute, though how that's playing out in the real world, I don't know.
We all have constituents who have said, which program do I apply to? And we've put them in the position of trying to figure that out. And it's not necessarily easy to navigate. So what this does is it says, you know, if you applied and received a grant from one particular program, but find later on that you could have gotten a larger grant from a different program, then you could still apply for that other program, provided it's not for the same purpose and provided that you're not going to go over the cap, the theoretical cap. So the question is, are they limited? We didn't do anything in this language, David, that limits them to the cap that is in existence for the S350 or H966 and the $50,000.
Those caps are all internal to those programs, and frankly, the agency could change those at any time they wanted to.
Understood. Yep. Right. Okay. So this really simplifies it for both the applicants and the agency and partners. I have to tell you, I didn't like this at first, and then I realized the beauty of it. Now I like it. I mean, it makes sense.
If I could add an illustration, if that's okay. Like what the difficulty was, our grant program was the first to get out of the gate, and the maximum was 50K. Then forest stabilization, as one example, was offering up to 100,000. So it would feel awkward to tell someone who's eligible for 100,000, you're not eligible at all because you got 50,000 from ACCD. Instead, we'd rather subtract the 50 from what they were eligible to receive from forest, parks and recreation. A way of grant stacking, I guess, is the terminology, but as per this piece of statute, it would be not in accordance. So it would be wonderful to help with administration.
So, okay, I see that. So if they were eligible for 100,000 in another program. So if they got the 50 from your program, they would, what you're saying is they should be eligible for another 50 from the other program.
Correct.
That makes sense.
There's other examples too, like AHS and, yeah. So it would make it simpler because we could share that information with the other agencies.
Do we need any other language that would, do we need language that would specify that they could receive no more than the highest grant they could get? You know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know how you say that, but maybe the way you just said it.
I don't know. What do you, your thoughts on that, David?
I mean, I feel like the caps, wherever they come from, would be applicable anyway, right? So if you had a
but if they, but if they received a $50,000 grant from ACCD and then they applied to ag for 100,000, I see what Joan's getting at is that they would be allowed to get up to another 50, so that it's capped at that 100,000. But
it's
would they be able to get
different purposes, right? I mean, it's for demonstrated loss for a particular purpose. So if you had a $50,000 reduction in revenue from which you could get a grant from Commerce, and then you're an outdoor business and you want to be able to go do work to, upgrade your facilities to have safe recreation, and you can demonstrate $100,000 in need. I mean, it's different than what Joan's talking about, but it seems like, again, you have two different amounts of need. They're for two different purposes, two different bases from two different programs. I don't know. There's never been I guess the state's never established like a maximum amount of benefit. It's always been linked to what you can demonstrate is your loss for a particular purpose under a particular program versus an aggregate cap, no matter where you get the money from. I don't know the answer. It sounds like you're suggesting there should be some language that basically says that, provided that it's offset by any other assistance. I don't know. Again, the commerce language does say, remember, that they shall consider whether and to what extent assistance should be reduced based on the availability of other assistance. So commerce sort of has that flexibility. I don't know about other programs and other agencies.
Yeah. I think both sets of examples that Joan and you have given make sense, at least to me, that people should be able to, I mean, if it's just revenue loss and they got 50,000 from commerce, and then if they were going for revenue loss and they could have got 100,000 from ag, I see no reason why they shouldn't get the other 50 from ag. But I also see that if someone applies to commerce for revenue loss and then applies to another program for something different than revenue loss, then why shouldn't they be able to receive help also? That makes sense to me. I don't know, what do others think?
It seems fine to me, because we do have that responsibility of the applicant also to make sure that they don't have a duplication of benefits, and you have the authority of the administration or the ACCD to take into account whether or not other sources of funding should reduce the amount of the grant that they grant. So it's covering both of those.
Yeah. Gene?
Thanks. I agree with just exactly what Charlie just said and what you're saying. Is they should have, if it's different, they should be able to receive up to 50 from us, and if they can demonstrate a need for 100,000 in forest, in ag, for an entirely different need at the same business, we should allow them to have that.
Yeah. Okay, so the proposal is to strike this subsection 1.
Just those lines in 10 through 12.
Right. 9 through 12 or 13?
Well, starting on, I'm sorry, I realize I'm not sharing anymore. It's this language on lines 10 through 12.
Yep, just the stuff with the strike through.
Oh, the dairy business?
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of making a new sentence and changing the meaning by striking the middle caveat.
Right, you're getting rid of the word not, right?
Business may not receive a grant of coronavirus relief fund monies from more than one source for the same purpose covered under other, yeah.
So again, I think an example might be helpful. So remember that the Agency of Agriculture Food Markets got, a formula for giving money to dairy farms. And obviously that wouldn't probably cover all of a dairy farm's loss, but maybe it covers losses from March to May. And that would be, under the current framework, that would be all they could get. They could not go to commerce. Under the CARES Act, they cannot go to commerce and get that same 3-month period of loss covered from commerce using CRF money. You can't double dip in that way. But we've gone a step further in this statute and said, not only can you not double dip, you can't get any other money. And so the change here, by striking this language, would just make it consistent with the CARES Act. You can't get CRF money from two sources for that same March, April, May period. However, with this change, you could get March, April, May from ag, and then you could try to get June, July, August from commerce. That would be the net result.
Okay, is everyone good with that? Okay, is there anyone not good with that? Okay, I think the consensus of the committee is to go along with that recommendation. We go back up to this one. So can you, I'm trying to, I'm not understanding what the issue is that you're having in commerce, and how this is working or not working. We're not being able to get money or enough money out to nonprofits because of this.
Give it a shot.
Sure.
So our issue is by reducing the revenue calculation by tax deductible charitable contributions, we have, we think justly, also reduced the revenue that we're calculating the grant on. So when we reduce the revenue for purposes of eligibility, we simultaneously have reduced the eligibility for the revenue we're going to calculate your grant on. This reduces the size of the grant that nonprofit arts organizations can receive. We, within ACCD, can change this for anybody but arts organizations, because this only applies to arts organizations. The Arts Council is about to get a check for probably $3.5 million of unused CRF money, because the way we implemented this, and they're going to run a new grant program that aims to award more money to nonprofit arts organizations. If they are held to this standard still, it will hamper their ability to do that. And it doesn't seem to make any sense. It doesn't seem to be having a good public policy effect.
So I think the issue that was in front of the committee, and the reason why we put it in there, was that we weren't willing, or we weren't, it was the dollars that the nonprofits were raising strictly from people giving money, not from dues that they were raising from their membership, not the dollars that they were raising is from fundraisers. It was strictly tax deductible contributions that people, out of the goodness of their hearts and the reason they're getting a tax deduction, were making those donations. So are we looking at, is there a reason why that's not working?
Now, I could use a perfect example. We had to deny one nonprofit organization that helped veterans and helped families of fallen veterans. They had no program service revenue. They only had charitable giving. So they were deemed ineligible and didn't get a grant. They had an economic impact, but we couldn't give them a grant by our rules. Not an arts organization, so we can change that ourselves in the second round, but the Arts Council couldn't for something like that.
Okay, Jim?
Thank you. I'm gonna lower my hand. Ted just answered it. But I want to just be clear, the allocation of grant money will take into account the charitable donations when the grant is made, or will not?
Currently, it does not. Currently, we took the charitable donations out for calculating the eligibility. And then we also, using logic, said we should also reduce the grant calculation by reducing the charitable donations out of their income. So currently, it's taken out for both. We'd proposed to put it back in for both.
To put the charitable donations in there.
Yep, just use the top line revenue for both.
Okay, well, explain what the top line is.
The best way I could explain it is if you look at a nonprofit 990, as Joan and I have had to do too many times, there's I don't remember which line it is from the 990, but there's one that reports all revenue. So
All revenue.
All revenue, okay.
All
That's
revenue.
the question, because I spoke with a nonprofit yesterday, and you know, they were eligible for a grant, but it wouldn't help them. So that's a great and important change to this. Thank you.
Jean?
I just want to weigh in and support Ted's definition. I think this makes a lot of sense because it will give the arts organizations more money in their grant funding and in the grant calculation. So I would support removing that language.
Charlie?
Just want to make sure that what we talked about yesterday and the possible implications for organizations that had previously applied for a grant, their grant was calculated based on their revenues without charitable donations. Will they have an ability to come back and include their charitable donations in their revenue to get an adjusted grant amount? That's just going to cause a few rebounds. I just want to make sure that we're aware of that, if that's the intention and how that comes back.
Yeah, I think again, by moving the pot of money to one big pot to take care of those who either didn't get all their need met, we would be able to include the nonprofits that are entitled to more.
Just want to make sure, because then we can tell our constituents, yeah, we know we didn't give you what you thought you were going to get before because we had to do that, but now you can reapply, essentially. If we do this. Okay.
Yeah.
Christy?
That was pretty much similar to my question. So thank you, Representative Kimball, for asking that. And thank you, Chairman, for letting me speak. The local chambers of commerce are nonprofits, but they're not part of this Vermont Arts Council. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So if we're going to remove this stipulation here, does that stipulation get removed further up in this bill proposal for the nonprofits? Would they be eligible to come back for adjustments or additional?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Just one last question. So when you're looking at all of the revenue for the nonprofits on their 990, does that include grants that they receive?
Yes, it includes everything. When we embarked on this and we saw this Arts Council change, we thought we couldn't treat one group of nonprofits separately from another. So we treated all nonprofits the same in just taking program service revenue, basically defined as those who did fee for service, kind of similar to a business that they were forced to close and therefore didn't have that revenue. Whereas other sources may not have been impacted by the virus because of closure or what have you. So yeah, we didn't have separate things for separate nonprofits. We figured let's treat all nonprofits equitably. If we had to do this for charitable, for arts organizations, we'll do it for all of the nonprofit organizations.
Yeah. I can understand why donations may be down because people are worried about their own pocketbooks right now. But how do you, if everything's lumped, is it all lumped together? Because, you could, an organization can get a grant that's good for last year, and that grant's gone. And that will reflect in the amount that they would get, I would assume.
Yep. Yep. I mean, it was an enormous amount of work to actually do this because each nonprofit really has a different way of accounting. So not all of them did itemization, and it was a painful process to send it back, to have them itemize, and then figure out which things are sort of, if you separate into things that are impacted by virus, things that aren't, right? So grants, presumably they could apply for a grant at any time. Some renewals of memberships went through irrespective of whether or not the place was shut down or events could happen. So an enormous amount of work on both the applicant side as well as the reviewer side. And yes, sometimes people lump it all together. They don't have a separation of program service revenue. Some of them didn't really know what we meant by program service revenue, whereas others had very detailed. They had grants separated out from membership, separated out from donations.
Okay. Zach?
I just wanted to clarify that it's not a straight year-to-year comparison, and you had $100,000 budget last year. This year is a $50,000 budget, so your reward is going to be based on that difference. That there has to be some sort of, you have to be able to show that a reduction in charitable donations was as a result of COVID, right? It's not like you can't, because I got a grant last year and then I didn't get the grant this year. You have to show that it was because of COVID and not because you had a bad application or something like that, right?
That is the difficulty in the nonprofit, which is why we stuck to program service revenue, because program service revenue is clearly impacted by a COVID closure, whereas other things are not as directly related.
Okay.
So I don't, as I'm contemplating this change, I think if this falls into the category of, rather than having people restate everything all over again, if we throw this into the category of one big pool for which others need to apply, they're going to have to show additional need. And we would probably have to have another long look at everybody's financial situation for that very reason. They are very unique and each year brings something different.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Yeah, because if we just hand the dollars out and then it comes back that it was a grant, it was a loss of a grant or they didn't apply for another one, we could wind up being on the having to pay that money back.
Correct.
We get audited. So we gotta be very careful on how you apply it.
Yeah, we had subtracted out all grants and donations and in some cases the dues.
Yeah. Okay, but your recommendation is for us to strike that language.
Well, yeah, I mean, as Ted mentioned, the Arts Council is going to take the remainder of their funds, and I guess it would be a lot more comforting for them to have the ability to go ahead and give the additional calculation. So this language would be problematic for them to do so. And then in order to be equitable with the other nonprofits, we would just lump whoever else has unmet need, come in and apply to us, and we'll have to analyze those applications.
But the Arts Council is going to have to analyze theirs
Correct.
also to make sure that the losses that are coming through are COVID related and not a grant.
Correct.
What is we get 5 minutes and we're on the floor. So what is the committee ready to make a decision on removing this, or do you want to think about it? Okay. Is there anyone not okay with removing this language? Because I'm going to take that as support for removing the language if I don't hear it. Okay. Okay, so we'll remove it. I think we're at our end point. I'm really pushing the envelope today. I think Charlie, I'll be in touch. And we'll be in touch with Ted and Joan and David also and see what the next steps are. And we'll try to, Amy will start an hour earlier tomorrow at 11:30. So we can try to get further with this and make those policy decisions we need to make or get close to where we need to be. Thank you all, appreciate it. We can go off live now.
Thanks.